Hello, world. You're listening to Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, where we're always creeping it real. I'm your host, Eleanor Wagner.
It's very clear from today's guest that you do not have to be a paranormal investigator to have a paranormal experience.
Stories come from every walk of life, and this man is no exception. He reigns from Moulton, Alabama, where he's a drummer with the metal band Never Mind the Damage. When I first spoke to him, he told me he didn't remember a time where he didn't have a paranormal experience. I can't wait to talk to him more about it today. Please join me in welcoming Justin Mason. Thanks for being here, Justin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Like you, I've had my own paranormal experiences. You mentioned having random experiences with strangers. Why don't you tell me about them?
There are a lot of times that I just see, and it's hard to explain what I see, but the best way for me to explain it is, I forget what the medicine is, but there's a depression medicine that has a commercial, and the person who's suffering with depression has this fog around them. And a lot of times I'll see this fog around people or different things like that. And I've also had encounters with spirits that I didn't recognize. So it's something that I'm 32 years old, and it's something that I've seen for as long as I can remember, for 32 years.
So that's kind of like your gift, the gift that you've been given. It's kind of a gift and not so much a gift at times. It can be, right? You say that you have dreamed of deceased loved ones. What happens in those dreams when you have them?
Conversations. My great-grandfather and I were close, and I've dreamt about him I don't know how many times. And it's me sitting in his old townhome and just having a conversation with him. But now, he passed away when I was 17, 18, and just have conversation with him. My grandmother on my mom's side, she passed away when my mom was just 9, so I've never met her, but I've seen pictures and stuff like that, and I've had dreams about her and just had conversations with her.
So they've been a part of your life, even though they aren't in this reality.
Right.
I find those dreams very poignant and special.
Mm-hmm.
And I have them too when I have my mom in it or my dad. It's a very special moment for me because I lost them. My mom had dementia for about 7 years. So during those 7 years, I really didn't have my mom. I mean,
right.
She was the type of person that was very vibrant and alive. And in those 7 years, it was just devoid of anything. You could say Merry Christmas to her in July and she'd be like, Merry Christmas.
Oh.
And it was very, very sad to have to go through that. And my dad, that was pretty sudden illness. I mean, we didn't expect it to happen. He retired in January and he was diagnosed with cancer in February and he was gone by June.
Goodness.
That's how quick it was. It was a blessing in disguise that he didn't have to suffer for a very long time, but it just happened like this, and
right.
He was gone. So when they appear to me in dreams, it's very special to me.
Mm-hmm.
You said you've had premonition dreams of someone's impending death, only to find out the next day that they were already gone. Mm-hmm. Were these people that were family members or friends?
The most recent dream I had, I dreamt about my grandmother being the person who passed away. My grandmother had some health issues pre-COVID, and she was in the hospital for a little while. She's home now, of course, but back this past April, I had a dream about her being in the hospital and her suffering a heart attack. And none of my family told me. And I woke up upset, but all I could think of was call Adam, who is a friend of mine from college. And I got in touch with him, and he said, yeah, my grandmother just passed away. She had a heart attack. I barely made it to even see her. And so I dreamt what he was going through, but it was my grandmother instead of his.
Right. So it wasn't as if you would have really known, but you found out that that was who it was actually meant for.
Right.
Interesting. Now, when you speak about having you said it was your great-grandfather and your grandmother in your dreams and how they talk to you, have conversations. Do you think of them maybe as being like your guardian angels now, sort of?
Yes, I do. There have been so many times that I have thought, this is going to end badly. Something is going to happen. And my grandmother, my dad's mother, is the one who passed on the gift to myself and all my cousins and my sister. We all have seen things and have dreams and stuff like that. My grandmother, her most recent thing was actually funny. They bought a mattress from a Goodwill store. And because we have these stores that people donate stuff to Goodwill, but then they sell some of the stuff they're called restores.
We call them consignment shops. stops here in Jersey.
Okay, gotcha. And so they bought a mattress from there and brought it home, and they had to return it within a week because she said this couple keeps arguing and they're keeping me up at night.
Oh.
So they had to return the mattress because she's so in tune with. I remember a time I think I was 18 or 19, and I had a girlfriend who lived about an hour away at the time, and I had a wreck coming home from seeing her, and I had to call my parents and have them come and get me and everything. And so my dad called my grandfather, and they had one phone in their house, and it was on the other side of the house from their bedrooms. And so my dad told my grandfather, hey, we're going to get Justin. He's okay. He had a wreck, this and that. And so he went back into the back of the house and went to tell my grandmother, and she said, oh, I know, Justin had a wreck. He's okay. I've been praying for him for the past 15 minutes. So she's always really been in tune, and that's just where I get it from.
That's crazy cool. And this is the grandmother that's still alive.
Correct, yes.
That's great. So this gift of sensitivity that you've had your whole life, is it sort of like what happens with the Long Island medium where you're out in town and suddenly you receive those feelings that are pertinent to a stranger you come across on the street? Does that sometimes happen as well?
Kind of, but it's different for me. I mentioned earlier kind of seeing a fog around somebody when they're going through something or something like that. That's how it happens to me. It's different colors for different emotions. So if somebody's feeling down, it's kind of a black fog. If somebody's feeling sad, it's kind of this bluish fog. But it doesn't happen to everybody every time. It's just kind of random and spontaneous.
Are you supposed to then say something to them? Are you supposed to go up to them and say, I have a message of some sort? Or
I would imagine you having this ability would enable you to help other people if they're in a bad place.
How do you take that when you receive it?
It depends on the situation. If I get close to the person and I feel like they don't want to be bothered, I kind of back off. And I think it's one of those situations where I go, well, I don't know why I'm seeing this for this person. Maybe I'm just meant to know what they're going through or something. But I have spoken to someone, just kind of asked them, hey, how are you feeling? And, they're like, well, thank you for asking me. I've had this bad day and this has happened and all this. And they're like, it's nice to have somebody to confide in because my grandfather just passed away and he was my last living relative. It has happened to where it benefits me or benefits that person. And then, but more often than not, it's just kind of okay, I see that you're going through something, but I feel kind of in my heart that you don't want me to interact with you.
I see. Because it could mean sometimes that maybe you're seeing something like, oh my goodness, this person's in danger and they've got to be careful of what they do next. I remember a story that somebody had shared in church service one Sunday. It was, they were giving a testament about a moment that they had, and they randomly persistently felt that they needed to approach this person that they didn't even know, that this stranger, and go and ask them, like, are you okay? I just have this feeling I want to talk to you and let you know that you have a friend and people care about you, even me, even though I'm a stranger. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. And it wasn't as if they were like you where they could see this fog. It was just this gut feeling, like the guardian angel you hear in your ear saying, go talk to that person. And in that moment, that person needed somebody to do that, and broke down literally in tears in front of this person and said, I've been contemplating taking my life, and today I decided that I was going to do it. And the only thing that was going to change it is if somebody showed me that they cared. So it almost seems like it could be something like that for you too, that you're receiving these black fogs or whatever because that person is in need of anybody.
Yeah, I've never experienced anything to that extent. I have on a spiritual level. I grew up in church and I'm still involved in a church, in a big church here in Alabama. But growing up in the church that I grew up in, we had summer camps every year. And I saw 2 or 3 instances where somebody had a demon exorcised out of them. So, I've been on that side of things as well as, the good side of things, I guess you could say.
From what I understand, when somebody gets possessed by a demon, the person that, and I don't know how true this is, but the person that becomes possessed is somebody that's either an innocent or somebody that has no belief. Is that true? Do you have any idea or not?
The instances that I ran into, it was the latter. it was somebody who basically had no belief. One of them was a pastor's daughter, and it just kind of makes you, okay, she didn't believe, but she had seen things that made her question God, so she turned her back on God, and that kind of gave that demon the stronghold that they needed.
The opening to the doorway to go in. Yeah, I can see. I've heard it's more often than not somebody who has no faith, that they're the vulnerable because they have nothing to lean on in their pain or anything. So
yeah, and it's odd when you watch these movies about possession and stuff like that, and it is children, and I think it's less likely to happen to a child. Yes, they're innocent, and yes, their faith is kind of growing and stuff like that, but a demon wants some kind of darkness or doubt. And not to really make this religious, but the Bible says to be as children. Children are forgiving, children are innocent, and children are really, it's hard for them to be accountable for the things that they do because they're learning, they're growing, and not only physically but spiritually. And so that's why it kind of dumbfounds me that a lot of these movies, you watch some of the Exorcist movies or the Conjuring or stuff like that, and it happens to children a lot, and I don't really see it happening to children in a real life situation because they're so innocent, and because biblically there's an age of accountability to where if a child dies, they go to heaven because they don't know any better, so they're free of sin. So when a demon possesses somebody, they're looking for a darkness, and if a child is not of the age of accountability, they have no darkness inside of them because they don't know darkness. So I don't know where I was going with that, but it just kind of crossed my mind.
You were mentioning that it was a pastor's daughter. How did that all come about? You happened to be there, and how were you there in that moment, I guess is what I want to say.
It happened at a camp that we were all attending. We had a summer camp that met one week in the summer in June, and I was there attending the camp, and it happened there. She was really battling internally with a lot of things. She was sitting under teaching that was telling her something that she used to believe, and she was telling herself that she didn't believe that, and so that just kind of gave that demon the stronghold.
Did it freak you out?
Kind of, because that was the first experience that I had of that. But then when it was explained to me what was going on, it was kind of like, okay, well, how does this end? And
tell me, how does it end? What happened?
A lot of the elders of that church organization prayed over her and basically had an exorcism. They had oil and everything and prayed over her. And when the demon left her body, I think I was the only one who physically saw it. But there were marks on her arm where it looked like the demon had a hold of her arm. So you saw a handprint on her arm, and there were scratches on her neck where it was fighting when they were praying it out.
How long did the whole exorcism take from start to finish?
It was about 2.5 hours.
Oh my.
Yeah.
And you say you physically saw this demon. Can you, in your own words, describe what this demon looked like to you?
If you imagine the old Casper movie, the live action one, where they're all white and just these figures, it was that, but black, pitch black. There was no true form to it. There were no eyes or mouth or anything. It was like Casper, faceless, but black.
Wow. I don't know if I could have stayed there and watched this whole thing take place. It takes a strong person to just be able to. But I guess when you're thinking that you need as many faithful there, in that sense, I would probably hang on to that, knowing that I was doing the better side of good of help to bring her back home.
Right.
Very interesting. And you said that you've been to more than one. That was your first?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was another one that happened with, and it's crazy that both of them were preacher's kids. The young man was a preacher's kid too. I say young man, he was a couple years older than I was. And it was really the same situation. He just quit believing. He had kind of formed his own opinion of what God was or what God wasn't. And just the same thing. He but he reacted to it differently. I don't remember what was said, but something set him off, and he went into the cabins and ripped the door off the frame and threw the door for the boys' cabin just 10 foot to his right. And it was one of those steel doors. And just right away, everybody's like, okay, not again, because it was kind of 2 or 3 years separating these two events. But it was the same situation. The elders got together and basically had an exorcism.
Now, after they were exorcised, the girl and this young man, do you recall whether they remembered any of happening, and were they changed people after the events? Did they renew their faith after that?
He didn't. She did.
Imagine that somebody wouldn't.
I think he was just so far gone that even after experiencing that, it was just one of those things where, okay, God didn't protect me from this, so he must not be real. I think that was his mindset. He was just so far gone the other way. Yeah. She said that she actually knew what was going on. Like she said that she felt him kind of taking hold of her body, almost like she was a robot in a sense.
Oh, boy.
And she heard thoughts of his intentions and desires, I guess you could say. And yeah, she renewed her faith pretty quickly after that.
That's amazing. And one did and the other didn't. I know I don't want to make this all about religion either, but we're kind of going towards that direction. And I have no problem with it if you don't.
No, not at all.
But I had years ago, probably going on maybe even 10 years ago, I read this series called the Left Behind series. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but it has to do with revelations and what happens when it happens. Of course, nobody knows. Only God knows. Everyone speculates and tries to guess. But I always tried reading the Bible and have a very difficult time understanding in today's terms. So when somebody had said, I was taking a disciple class once and we were learning about Revelation, somebody had said, you should read this series because it brings it down to your level where you can relate to what's written in the Bible in today's term. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And it was one summer. I want to say there's 20 books, and they're probably all about 300 pages long, and I took a whole summer and read one right after the other, just couldn't stop. And you had said the irony of these two possessions were that they were the children of pastors. It's very frightening that one renewed their faith and the other didn't. And it makes me realize how many of others are out there. And why I brought up the whole Left Behind book was, although the story surrounding the book is fictional, it's based on biblical fact, which is true. They were talking about how one of the characters was actually a pastor. And when the day came and people woke up and their spouses were gone and all that was left there was this dust and their clothes, and they were left behind. They were left behind because they didn't have their faith. And one of the characters in the story is actually a pastor, which would be ironic too. You know, here he is preaching to his congregation that we need to believe, and he himself didn't even believe. So you just made me think about that when we were talking about it. But it's a great series. If you haven't read it, I recommend it to everybody.
I agree. I read it. Oh my goodness. I was still in high school when I read it, and books were still coming out. So I would love to go back and reread it myself.
They were just so great. So sit on the edge of your seat. I just couldn't stop reading. It was so good. Yeah. Getting back to what we were talking about earlier and having somebody randomly come up to you on the street and say, oh, I see this fog. Or like you've heard other people say, I see a loved one beside you. I personally have always wanted someone with that particular gift to randomly approach me on the street with like this great big reveal from one of my deceased loved ones, but I've never had the pleasure of such an experience. I've had my own visitations from deceased loved ones in the past. My father came to me the morning that he died. My mother-in-law contacted me as well the night that she died. And for me, it was very poignant. Like I like to use that word to describe it because I felt like they were letting me know that they were okay, but it was also giving me the opportunity to share this message with everyone else. Like my husband when his mom died and his sister. Yeah. And my mother-in-law was a firm believer that you get these messages from your loved ones. And she said to me, I'm going to let you know I'm okay. And she definitely did. Yeah. And I wrote about them in my first book, my Sussex County Hauntings and Other Strange Phenomena book, because I felt when I was writing that book, even though I was writing about hauntings around my county, I also wanted to share my own personal experiences with people and wasn't sure if I've received messages from deceased loved ones. And those are the most touching stories when you involve relationships with loved ones, especially if people are with them at their time of death. Mm-hmm. They're just very, very touching. You always hear the joy in the person's voice, even though they had lost their loved one, just to be there in that moment and see and hear them speaking to others that you couldn't see or hear always seems to send this message of love and that everybody's okay. People look to signs or symbols as an indicator of a presence of a deceased loved one. I was reading a blog post recently by Ryan Hart, and it was listing a bunch of these signs. I'm not sure if you have heard any of them, but one of them was feathers on the ground. For me specifically, these are considered a gift, though I've never associated it with a deceased loved one being present. I have thanked the universe for the gift and the good fortune, picked it up and brought it home with me. Now I don't know how many feathers I have around my house. Some people look to it as, not to worry that they'll be provided for. How about you? Have you ever thought the significance in feathers?
No, I just hope that coyote didn't get a hold of a bird or something, usually when I see feathers on the ground.
Well, maybe now that I've mentioned it, when you see one from here on in, you'll think of something different.
I've heard a lot of those types of things, but I've never really seen any significance in them in my personal life. I'm not going to knock anybody else for believing that, because like I have a friend who her gift is smells. Mm-hmm. She has certain smells, and those smells mean specific things to her. Kind of like for me, seeing the fog around people means different things for me. So I'll never kind of scoff at things like that, but it's not something that I've experienced or that I've kind of believed in myself.
I've also heard some people say, well, how do I know if they're around? I said to them, my advice is pick anything. Pick something that's going to be significant for you. And once you put that out to the universe and to the heavens, they're going to know that that's what you're looking for. And they're going to send you that message through that avenue. You had mentioned sense. That's one of actually the pieces that he lists as a sign of a loved one, a scent. And for your friend's gift, it's probably something that happens to her all the time, not for me. But oddly enough, I've smelled my father's sweat. I know it sounds strange, but he was a construction worker and a pipe fitter for many years. And he would come home after a hard day's work with the smell of fresh air on his body, wintergreen lifesavers, because he used to eat them like they were out of style, and sweat. And I have picked up that smell several times over the years when I was alone. Researchers actually say that our sense of smell is closely linked with our recall abilities. So if you smell something and it reminds you of a loved one, then it's their presence there with you. Some people associate kitchen smells they pick up when they aren't even near a kitchen. I don't know how I would feel about a kitchen smell. Maybe if I could smell my mother's paprika chicken or something, then it was like, that's not something that's regular in the kitchen, but randomly smell that, oh my God, a reminder of home. Kind of like Thanksgiving dinner, and you smell all the good food cooking, and then that's Thanksgiving for you, Another one they said was butterflies, taken as a positive sign. I know a friend of mine swears by butterflies. She actually uses it as her emoji when she texts. She always signs her name, Kim, and she puts the little butterfly. And then another one is dragonflies.
Her niece lost her mother at a very young age.
And for her, dragonflies have always been the symbol that her mom is around. They signify transformation and change. And it's believed if one lands on you or flies by you, that it's an indicator of change coming to you soon. But others say it's a loved one telling you that whatever troubles you are facing currently, they're only going to be temporary and be resolved soon. I was there last summer visiting in North Carolina, and she was sitting in the pool, and all of a sudden she puts up her finger in the air like this, and this dragonfly comes and literally lands on her finger. Oh, wow. And she's standing there inside the pool soaking with this dragonfly on her finger. And I'm thinking, wow, you really get those signs from your mother with the dragonflies. It was really wild to see. And I plenty of times I'll see the dragonflies flying around me when I'm in the pool, and I'll stick my finger up, hoping one of them will come and land on my finger. But no, I'm not so lucky. Then he also said in his blog, finding pennies and dimes, but I've always heard just coins in general. People are told to pick up the coin and look at the date, and that the date can be an indicator of who that coin is being sent by, maybe by their birthday or the day they died. Incidentally, if when you're looking at the date, no one in particular comes to mind, they say save the coin and it might come to you later. For me, with the coins, if I see one, honest to goodness, if I see one on the ground and it's heads up, I'll pick it up. But if it's tails, I won't. And that could just be, I don't know what you call it, but it's been inbred in me. My mother is, it's bad luck.
So I never touched it and only picked it up if it was on heads.
Yeah, my late uncle used to tell me all the time. He said, never leave a coin laying on the ground. If it's on tails, kick it until it gets to heads.
Oh!
He says, so that way you never pick it up when it's on tails.
I'll have to try that out the next time. Because if you're in the supermarket parking lot, you're always finding coins. So I'll have to try that, kicking it and making sure it goes onto head so I can pick it up then. Especially if it's a quarter.
Yeah, for real.
But the other one was smooth, odd, or unique stones. And this was entirely news to me and something I've never heard before. But it kind of makes sense because there have been moments in time when I've gone specifically for one particular stone when I was on the beach because I had my eye on it. With all the other sea stones around it, I would go for one in particular. And it said it's been placed there specifically for you to find and see by a loved one, that it's also a message to let you know that they're watching over you. Have you ever done that when you're at the beach, just randomly picked up stones?
I haven't, but I found that the tranquility of the beach kind of gives me a more keen awareness for seeing things, for connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never dealt with stones or anything like that. Usually I look for shells more than stones. But yeah, I feel like the tranquility of the beach for me has gotten me more connected to some family. Like if I'm missing my great grandfather or something like that, and I'm on vacation at the beach or visiting the beach or whatever, I feel like I feel him more, or whoever it may be.
When you're in that tranquil moment.
Mm-hmm.
The beach is my happy place. Although I have a joy and love of nature in general, I can find as much happiness being in Lake George on the lake with the sun setting. But my happier place is the ocean. If I could live on the ocean, I would. Not so much my husband, he's a lake person, so it's kind of like, oh, okay, just gotta visit it. But we were mentioning dreams, and this blogger had mentioned that dreams of loved ones was another symbol. Obviously, you've always associated a visit from a deceased loved one in a dream, and some have suspected of having like a hidden message in its story. But I think it's just as wonderful where you were having your dreams of your great-grandfather just sitting in his townhome having a conversation, almost as if he never left. And that's probably all that you really needed. That was probably doing what it was meant to do, having this relationship with him, even though he's not here in this reality.
Well, and it just reminds me of him being here. With the year that he passed away, my best friend at the time, he was graduating from the Air Force, and it was during the week of Thanksgiving. And I was invited to go and see him graduate from the Air Force. And I told my grandmother I wasn't going to go because that would be our first weekend without, or that would be our first Thanksgiving without Papa. And she said, no. She said, I will drive you there myself. She said, you're going. She said, I know that it's going to be a tough Thanksgiving and all of that. She said, but I don't want you to miss that experience. So, I mean, that's just what he meant to not only me, but just everybody in my family.
So you went to the graduation from the Air Force. That's what you said, right? And you weren't there for the Thanksgiving. Did you have like a visit with him in a dream right after?
No, it probably was a year after the next time I, actually had a dream about him and all of that. Being a musician, I write a lot, and I had written a couple of poems having to do with him and different things like that. But as far as having dreams or anything, I did not.
Do you feel like those dreams come when you need them the most, maybe?
Yes. I feel like not only when I'm missing that person the most, but when I need reassurance that maybe they would be proud of me, or need reassurance that something that they taught me I'm actually using. That's when I actually get a visit from them in my dreams and just actually get to sit down and have a conversation with them.
That makes total sense. Total sense, for sure. Now, another one of the things that the guy said in the blog was finding personal items
in strange places.
I personally don't think this is
particularly associated with the deceased loved one.
Unless it's one of significance, like somebody's ring or somebody's diary, let's say, then I can say it's specifically related to the person who that belongs to. But in more instances, when we go on investigations and somebody says stuff gets moved all the time, I don't take it as a deceased loved one. But that's just what the guy said. And then another one was sensing the loved one's presence of hearing the calling of your name can be a sign. Though the calling of one's name has often been associated with paranormal activity or paranormal mimicking. If you hear your name called while you're sleeping or dreaming, this, I think, is a sure sign it's a loved one. But if you're in your house and all of a sudden you hear, say, your wife call your name and you're like, I'm here, hon, I'm here. And you keep on saying, hey, are you there? And she's not even home. That's paranormal activity. So there's a distinct difference between the two.
So I've actually had an experience kind of like that. My aunt, she suffered with cancer for 10 years. And when my wife and I had our first son, I was working nights and my aunt had just passed away. And when my aunt was healthy, she and my wife had the same kind of body type. They were the same height, kind of the same weight, same figure. And I had just gotten off of work and laid down and our son had started crying. So I rolled over and I saw somebody standing over his crib. I assumed it was my wife. I rolled back over and she walks in the door with a bottle. She goes, why didn't you pick him up? I said, you were just standing right there. And so, she got him up at him, and the next morning she got up and she said, what happened? I said, I think it was my aunt. I said, I think it was my aunt just looking over him. And she goes, oh, okay. Because she knew about this gift that I have.
Now, your child, after your aunt passed away, was your son born after your aunt died?
No, he was born about a month before. So she actually got to hold him once before she passed away, which was honestly a dream of hers when she found out that my wife and I were pregnant. So,
well, that kind of happened with my sister-in-law and her aunt and her son, Alex, when he was born. Her aunt, Anne, held her son. Actually, she took a trip to go visit Ellen and the new baby and held him. And the next day she passed away. And the baby started looking up at the ceiling a lot and like giggling. And, Ellen was sure that was her Aunt Anne coming to see the baby again after death. But they say children are very, very sensitive to that sort of thing anyway. They can see spirit, and they reach a certain age. I think it's like 5 or 6 when they don't anymore.
Yeah. So the first house that we moved into, there was a older lady that was a ghost that lived in that house with us. And my son was, my oldest, was 1 or 2 at the time, and he saw her as well. And he would talk to her. I was cooking hot dogs for him one day, and he looked at the front door and he goes, Daddy, ghost. And I said, yeah. I said, that's a ghost. And he said, she's cold. I said, she's cold? And he said, yeah, she's cold. And I looked up and she had her arms like crossed, like she was cold, and she was gone. She just disappeared after that.
You mean you never saw her ever again?
I didn't see her in that moment.
Oh,
I saw her so many times after that. She actually, I guess because my wife doesn't believe, she messed with her. She would have a basket of laundry in the middle of the bed, leave the room, come back, and it be pushed off of the bed. And when we moved out of the house, her grandfather had given Bentley a toy that sang John Jacob Jingleheimer Smith. And when you got done playing with it, if you stopped playing with it for, I think it was a minute, it would say bye-bye. And so she hated that toy. So we left it at the house, and it was on the other side of the house from the front door. And my wife goes, all right, Bertha, I hope to never see you again. And the toy from the other side of the house goes bye-bye. And she ran out of the house.
So your wife sounds like my husband, the believer, non-believer.
Right.
Because if you don't believe it, you're not going to get scared of it and you're not going to run.
Mhm.
I remember the first time my dad, well, not, it wasn't really the first time, a time that my dad came to me, it was after my Victoria Lee was born, and she was real tiny at the time, and she and I were having a mommy and me moment in her bedroom. Like, I had the light dimmed and I was sitting in the rocker and I was just having this moment with her, and I had left the door slightly ajar, and before I know it, this like smoke comes wafting through the room, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I freaked out. I thought the house might be on fire. So I get up with the baby in my arms, ready to open up the hall door to see smoke in the doorway in the hall, but there's nothing there. And I turn around and there's the smoke wafting in the air, and then it took off and it came to me, it's Dad, and went out the wall. And I was like, wow. I was so excited about it. I was like, I'll go tell my husband, Steve. So I'm like, Steve, you're never going to believe it. My father was just here. And he's like, what? He didn't believe it to the point where he wanted to admit it, but he did say, can we get the priest in here to exorcise the house? And I'm like, I'm not going to exorcise my father.
That's what my wife has said. She has said, when we build a house, we're going to have our pastors come and pray over the land. And I'm like, I'm fine with that.
Right.
But I don't want to get rid of something that's been there for who knows how long.
Yeah, especially if they were there before you. It's kind of like the same when I live in
Bear country.
and people, they're nuisance bear. And I feel like, well, we are in their spot. We need to live with them.
So I kind of feel if you move into a property and there is a spirit attached to it, then it's your responsibility to learn to live with it. A good idea is to sage it every once in a while just to keep whatever is there at bay.
The better thing to do is just to be able to live in harmony. I mean, when I go into a home with my paranormal team and the family is afraid, when they tell me something, I'll know if something's bad if I walk into the house. You can sense it right away.
Right.
And know that it's nothing to be afraid of. If you can even push yourself to the point where you're kind of like talking to them and saying, yeah, I'm going to paint the kitchen a different color. I hope you like it. That's all they want. They want to be acknowledged.
Right.
And most of the time, the homeowner is agreeable to that extent. And also, I want to find out when I go into a paranormal investigation, does this spirit want to stay or leave? Because sometimes they've missed the light. For example, if they died in a tragedy, suddenly, sometimes they don't know they're gone. This light tunnel up here, but and it's not there forever. So oftentimes they'll have missed it and they're kind of stuck. So do you want to go or don't you? That's the thing.
Right.
I remember one time we did an investigation, and when the mediums were picking up the spirits, there were two specific spirits. There was a man named Salvatore
And a little boy.
They weren't from the same time frame, but Salvatore had met this little boy in this abode that they were haunting. And as it turned out, Salvatore was a gay Catholic, and he had committed suicide because his faith
Did not agree with him.
being gay. And the little boy,
Suffered from epilepsy.
and back in the day, if you had something like that, you were considered kind of cursed.
And you were isolated from society.
In death, he was taking care of this little boy because he too suffered from being bullied and excluded from society. And they were afraid to go into the light. They were afraid to go into the light because mostly Salvatore thought he wasn't going to be accepted. And so we prayed for them, and we explained to him that in the light, there's love and acceptance. No one will treat you any differently, but with love. And we were hopeful that when we went back there the next time that they had actually gone to the light, and we found out that they did. So I was like, yes, our job is done. We did what we were supposed to do. But sometimes they just want to stay. Sometimes they just like being here. But they don't realize that if they go into the light, they can always come back and go back and forth if they want. But if they stay here and never go into the light, then they're stuck. So I kind of try and let them know that just because you go into the light doesn't mean you can't. So that's the benefit of it. It's just getting them to understand that and believe that that's the different thing.
Yeah.
Then one of the other things the guy had said was lights flickering randomly. Well, for me, this is none other than paranormal activity. Though a phone call that shows up with the number of the deceased loved one is without a doubt a loved one reaching out. Like one of my team members, her sister-in-law had passed away, and probably a few days after, she gets a phone call from her on the cell phone. You know how the person's name comes up on the cell phone, and she picks it up and there's nothing but static. That to me is them, a loved one trying to call you. But just like flickering on and off, whether it's an electrical or a paranormal problem. I don't think it's a deceased loved one messing with you. And then he also said something about seeing angel numbers, which I don't know anything about numbers and numerology. Somebody said 1212 is a number, 444. This is something I don't know anything about, but people pick up sequences, numbers on their accounts or license plates, phone numbers, lottery tickets, that sort of thing. And that's supposed to be a symbol of a loved one. I've never heard of that before. Then there's hearing music or their favorite song. This is a cool story. A friend of mine had an incident occur recently which related specifically to this symbolism. His aunt had died last year, and they never got to hold the memorial service until recently because COVID happened. And she was really into, I want to say it was 50s music, but I'm not 100% sure what kind of music she was into. But for the story's sake, let's say she loved this 50s music. And whenever he would ride in the car with her, he'd put a station on that specifically played 50s music so that she could listen to it when they were driving. Mm-hmm. So he's at the memorial service and he's I guess driving away from it or to it or parking or whatever, but he decides to, in her memory, put the station on. And then all of a sudden,
this song comes on the radio.
And you know how they have the readers in the car, so some cars can, when the song comes on, it tells you what the name of the song is and what the band is that's playing it. Well, the name of the song was Joanne, and his aunt's name was Joanne.
Oh, wow.
And he's one of those non-believer believers, and he took out his phone, and he took a video. He said, I got to put this on a recording. This is what just happened. And he said it all, and he's, look at the radio. That's what's playing, and her name is Joanne. So to me, that's definitely a sign.
Yeah, my aunt that I spoke about, I grew up around her and everything, and I remember her having this convertible, and she would drive my sister and her daughter are like 3 months apart. So they are very close. But then I was always tagging along because I was at the age where I couldn't be left alone or whatever like that. So, but I remember riding in that convertible and her playing on repeat Cover of the Rolling Stone by Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. And so every time I hear that song, it just instantly brings back that memory. Like I can feel the wind. I can smell her cigarette because she was a smoker. I can smell her cigarettes. All of that. I go back to that place.
Oh, how sweet is that? That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Another one that they said was ringing in the ears. But when I was growing up, my mother told me if you ever hear your ear ringing, it means someone's talking about you. So you better be watching yourself. Every time I had a ringing in the ear, I never associated it with a deceased loved one. I was like, uh-oh, who's talking about me now?
I always heard if your ear was
burning, that somebody was talking about you. Oh, I never heard that. All these superstitions, right? But yeah, he claims, this blogger, that others say it's heaven talking to you. So I think I'd like to think it's better than someone talking about me.
Right.
But this blogger, Ryan Hart, suggested that if you wish to make contact with a deceased loved one, a good way to do it is to sit down and actually write them a letter. And I think that's kind of therapeutic too. If you're writing a letter, letting them know you're thinking that they're going to know, they're going to hear it, even in your mind as you're writing it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one reason that I turned to poetry. Like I said earlier, when I was thinking about my great grandfather, I wrote poems that kind of had to do with him or were just memories of him. So, I mean, I think that, I feel like that is very true, whether it be writing a letter or be writing a poem or just putting pen to paper on, I'm feeling this way. I miss you. This is what I miss about you. Because there were so many times I had a great aunt that I was close to that passed away of pneumonia. And the next day I had written probably 3 or 4 poems about her. And it was just because I was so close to her and just missed her. And I had dreamed about her that day before and, all of that. So it was just kind of a way for me to keep her in my heart.
She was your inspiration, and those poems are your release.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really nice. When you're writing those poems, or if you were to write a letter, like I was just talking to you about it, how I said that they can hear you in your mind. They can hear your mind speaking to them. Some people refer to it as telepathy, and that's a way of communication. It might very well be. I don't know. But I do feel like even whether you speak out loud to them or if you speak to them in your head, even when you say your prayers at night, I don't speak out loud when I say my prayers. I say them in my head. I know that they're being heard. So you writing that poem, you know very well that they're hearing what you're writing.
Yeah, and I've noticed that it doesn't work. I have to actually put pen to paper. I can't type something out, or I can't write it on my cell phone. It has to be like me physically writing the letter. I'm not sure why that's significant, but it is.
No, I get that. That sounds logical. That's your thing. That's great. I love it. I've also heard about spirit and loved ones using modern technology and social media by sending powerful texts that will give you goosebumps. I was reading about some crazy texts on this site called Deceptify. This one guy, T, who worked in a funeral home, was helping parents arrange the funeral for their 19-year-old son, Bobby. And he was helping them to decide what they wanted to bury in the casket with him. And they decided to go with a baseball cap, sports team hoodie, and his cell phone turned off, obviously, which seems to be quite the thing for people to do nowadays. They put the cell phone in. I didn't know that, but apparently this is what they do. They put the cell phone in there. And later on, when T went home after work, his phone rang while he was heading into the shower.
He didn't recognize the number.
He picked it up and he went, "Who's this?" And the response was Bobby. T didn't know anyone named Bobby. So he said, "Sorry, I think you got the wrong number." And the text said, "No, I don't. You were with my parents this afternoon."
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is.
And then another story was about a family who buried their grandmother, Leslie, with her cell phone because she was a prolific texter, and they felt it was appropriate that they should do so. Her granddaughter was periodically texting her beloved grandmother after her passing, probably as a way of dealing with her grief, but obviously never expecting an answer back until she got one. It said, "I'm watching over you. You will get through this. You'll be all right."
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool? So
It is. It really is.
They understand the power of modern technology. Well, Justin, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with me tonight, and I really appreciate you opening up about your own paranormal experiences. I hope that the public gets out of it as much as I have in our discussion. And to you, my ghostly listeners, you can follow me on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com.
Thank you, paranormal enthusiasts, for tuning in today. I hope you'll come back again. Remember to tap into your own gifts. Everyone has them. And in the meantime, make sure you're creeping it real.